That's perfect.
Great.
Okay. I think I should be recording right now.
It
Okay.
says recording, yeah. I'm gonna write, I always like to take notes, so I'll be doing a little bit of that, okay?
That's perfect. Okay,
But
so
before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and any other person who's gonna interview me, just so I kind of
for sure.
get a feel on you. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
so a little introduction. It's just gonna be me today because Neha is doing another interview, so we're trying to split it up. But I'm Benecia Jude. I'm 17 years old, and I live in Oak Park, and I'm an Oak Park High School student. I'm a senior right now, and I'm really passionate about educational equity, and working for justice in the classroom has really driven that passion because we've been trying to put our 6 proposals into fruition by really fighting for our students.
Are the 6 proposals the brief?
So the 6 proposals are on our website. I can share my screen right now and then show you.
I didn't see them, and
Yeah.
okay.
So basically, most of our proposals are centered around a holistic approach to educational equity. So we have 6 proposals that focus on, let me pull it up right now. Okay, let me try to share my screen. That way you can see it. Okay, so our first proposal is...
Would you mind if I recorded too? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so our first proposal centers around curriculum change, and this is basically about creating like a culturally responsive learning environment through the curriculum, because a lot of the curriculum in the United States and in California tends to be centered around outdated practices and Eurocentric perspectives. So we really want to create a more inclusive perspective with different chapters from the civil rights movement to Native Americans to just different perspectives with history and English and everything. And also we want to promote empathy and cross-cultural friendships and just really critically viewing the world around us with more of a holistic perspective around the world. Our next proposal is we have releasing public reports. This is really important because a lot of times in communities of color, and especially communities in general that are in a lower socioeconomic status, the funding for schools with Black, Latinx students are often less per student compared to higher socioeconomic neighborhoods with less people of color. So we really advocate for holding districts accountable and assessing our equity structures that are pre-existing right now and existing in the future. Our next proposal is diversity and inclusion. It's pretty simple. It's just basically implementing diversity and inclusion programming for both students and for teachers. So we really want to create a relationship with the faculty and educators and the students to promote an environment of inclusivity and diversity, because not only is diversity important, it's also important that these students feel super inclusive and feel super warm and feel the warmth of the education system. Our fourth proposal is hiring more educators of color, because it's obviously important for students of color to see educators of color in positions of power and in teaching positions, because the resources that they provide is often nuanced with their own experiences with being a person of color. And we have a little data surrounding all of that. Another really key thing that kind of goes hand in hand with diversity and inclusion is equity training. It's really important that educators and students know how to respond when there is instances of racism happening on campus. For example, like there has been a rise in hate crimes since the last election, And a lot of times there's been anti-immigrant sentiments and anti-Muslim sentiments where students have felt really uncomfortable in the education system itself. So we want to train teachers, and we want to address this problem by having a clear equity training programming for our educators. And our last proposal is disciplinary student punishment reform and disciplinary practices reform. And this is basically geared toward how a lot of times Black and brown majority schools have over-policing and SRO programs that tend to target these students into going directly into the school to prison pipeline. And we really want to address this problem and understand that though law enforcement can be important in some situations, a lot of times therapy or social work or psychologist funding could be just as important into addressing disciplinary concerns. So those are basically our 6 proposals.
Okay.
Any
They're great.
questions?
I would love to spend a lot of time looking at that material. I do have some background in educational litigation because I'm a lawyer, and I've worked on some, I think, major cases actually in our state about some of those issues, but we can get into that if you want to ask me.
Great. Yeah. So I guess just because you just led us into that, what are some of those really important cases that have shaped the way for education reform within California and Ventura County?
This makes me think I would love to teach this subject in law school, because the only time I've ever taught has been in law school. I've been a lawyer for more than 40 years. I was on the board of trustees for Ventura Colleges of Law for Ventura and Santa Barbara. I just finished a long, I think, 10-year term there. And I taught consumer law, landlord-tenant law, collaborative advocacy, but I never got to teach this. And it's really interesting, especially now with some of the, shenanigans, shall I say. Again, so I'm a lawyer. My background is in legal aid, which is legal services for low-income people. And back in the day, I was able to get involved in a number of cases that affected equity, punishment, rights of deaf students, rights of special education students, and more particularly low-income students who, and also Spanish-speaking students, and maybe even who had Spanish-speaking parents. So when I first came to the county, I came to work for an organization called Legal Aid Association of Ventura County. The office was in the Colonia. I don't know if you know where that is in Oxnard, a real poor part, but actually to me, very deep in my heart, part of our city of Oxnard. And the first case I was actually given was the Soria case. Soria's, it is a case that's akin to Brown versus Board of Education. You're nodding your head, you know what it is. Well, I got there after the case had already been adjudicated by consent decree, and my job was to do the follow-up for the enforcement of the consent decree. This is a case that is really almost like Brown versus Board of Education, and that the lawyers who were my colleagues at the legal aid program discovered that the school district, Oxnard School District, in the 30s and the 40s created a de jure segregation system. So if you ever been to the Colonia, have you been to the Colonia?
I think I visited parts of it. Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay, all right. So even people in Oxnard, not everybody in Oxnard has been there, but I worked there for, I'd say, I certainly worked there for 10 years when I worked for the court after my stint at legal aid. There are 2 elementary schools that are like 2 blocks from each other. And that's because the school district wanted to keep all the Mexican kids in that neighborhood. And so when the attorneys found these minutes of the school board from the 30s and in the 30s, where they were creating a Mexican schools, and they didn't want the Mexican kids generally to mix with the white kids, because the parents were demanding that. The school board was, let's just say, full of racist people. And now there's a real effort, a coming effort, I think, to change the names of some of our schools. And one of our schools did get changed from, well, I better not say which one, because I can't remember now which one it is. There's so many unfortunate names, but it was changed to Dr. Manuel Lopez, who is our former first Latino elected mayor in Oxnard, who always did everything for education and for the people of Oxnard. So the school was named after him, after young students at this particular school discovered their school was named after a big old racist. So that was based on the work of David Garcia. Do you know who that is? You do. Yes. David lives around the corner from me. Well, a few blocks over. Anyway, his work explored housing segregation in Oxnard and educational segregation. So that was one, and that was interesting because even as late as the 80s, the school district, which totally changed now, the demographics of the city have really become predominantly Latino. The school district was trying to get my legal aid office that I was now the director of defunded because we worked on that case. That's too complicated to get into all the details, and we don't have, how much time do we have?
We have we'll probably end around 4:45. Is
Okay.
that good? Yeah.
Great. I mean, because I could go on till maybe 7, 8. Anyway, after that, I also worked on a case called Gonzalez versus McEwen, which was Spanish-speaking parents had received notices of their children's disciplinary action, like expulsion, suspensions, completely in Spanish. And the office went to court, the firm went to court on behalf of parents who weren't understanding, and the school district didn't, this is a high school district, did not provide any information. Of course, their kids were going to lose the right to education if they got expelled, and they wouldn't have a chance to defend. And that was in federal court. So the other case was also in federal court. Now, a case before this that I didn't work on, but other legal services attorneys worked on, was called Serrano versus Priest. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. It seems, yeah. So there's so many interesting cases. Serrano versus Priest was in the 70s as well. And it was really about how schools were funded. Back then, schools in public schools in California, and we have a California Constitution provides a tuition-free public education. And this case was about how schools were funded. And it was clear that schools were funded based on the property tax revenue from a particular area. So if you lived in a poorer town, your schools were only going to get so much money per student. If you lived in a wealthier neighborhood, I always want to say Bel Air, Beverly Hills, but there's others, the schools were going to get more. It was completely unfair and deprive students of a quality education. It was a violation of equal educational access. And so that was decided that all the schools were going to be funded on the same formula. Now, what happens is we still had needs in schools, and where the parents were wealthier, the community is wealthier, they were able to supplement. So it was still uneven. I also worked on a case called Hartzell versus Connell, which was against the Santa Barbara School District, which started to charge a fee for extracurricular activities. And we did prove in the Supreme Court of California that that was unconstitutional, because theoretically you couldn't even charge students for a pencil, gym clothes, go to band, sports, anything. We did prove that. And somehow it's been chipped away all these years since I haven't been working on it. But it is a friend of mine says, education is a civil rights issue of today, because if we don't have educated people, they won't be able to have a prosperous life, a good life. They won't be able to really participate in society. And whenever you have that disparate impact, it impacts all of us. If people aren't getting a good education, they're not going to be able to contribute to society. They might cause problems. There's crime, there's poverty, there's the social negatives are really high. We'll all pay for it. So in a bad way. So I've worked also on representing students in expulsion hearings when they were being unfairly targeted. And I had some interesting cases that nobody would believe I could get these young people saved from expulsion when they did some things. But generally speaking, they were provoked by teachers and staff that were acting in a racist manner. And they acted out, they defended themselves, and I was able to defend them from teachers who called them racist names or physically abused them. So there's more, but well, I'll leave it there. It's too much, I could go on.
Thank you so much. I mean, just your work in like the desegregation and integration of schools is really inspiring. As we talk about that, I think something that's very important within Oxnard and within Ventura County is the Spanish-speaking population. And sometimes there is a block between language. How do you think the education system should create a more culturally responsive learning environment that includes these students of color that speak a different language and are trilingual or bilingual?
Right, you said trilingual because in our city, we have a lot of people who've come here from Oaxaca, and they speak indigenous languages, and sometimes they don't even speak Spanish. And I've had clients who they're not really literate in Spanish. And they, for example, I didn't do criminal law, but I knew of someone's relative who was in jail for something, and they would send Spanish interpreters, and the person wouldn't be able to communicate. And the district attorney deputy at that point insisted, well, you look Mexican, I'm sure you speak Spanish. And just, they thought this person was being obstinate. So that has really changed. We have a great group down here called MICOP, Mixteco.org, working with our families and individuals that come from Oaxaca and other parts of Mexico and don't speak Spanish, and then a lot of the younger people are trilingual, and this is a tremendous advantage to have. There is a need for people to be bilingual. And it's so interesting to me that we have people who don't appreciate bilingualism. Do you speak another language?
Yeah, my family speaks 3, so it's a lot, yeah.
And to me, it's such an advantage. And if a person comes into school, a child comes into school speaking, say, Spanish, why not develop that? I mean, they do this in Europe. I know in a lot of parts of the world, people are expected to learn. You're not an educated person if you can only speak your home country language. I know in other cities, even in our county, we have this dual immersion program. I know in LA, in the San Gabriel Valley, where I used to live for a while, children can learn Mandarin. Such an advantage for international trade and communication and government diplomacy. And why are we kind of putting people down because they speak Spanish? Now, my father was a Spanish speaker and my mother was not. And I know he grew up in the time in California when, he was born in 1909, a long time ago. And Mexican people in California, and he was not an immigrant, he was born in California, but still people were treated as second-class citizens if they were Mexican, Mexican descent, or Mexican ancestry, I'm told, that's what I should say, Mexican ancestry. And he didn't want us to learn Spanish. So I had a struggle to keep it. Our grandmother lived with us, She was born in 1888 in Lemoore, California, Central Valley. She spoke kind of what we would call broken English. She was not literate. She couldn't read or write. And I wanted to learn Spanish, but I had to really struggle, go to school for it, read, still trying to perfect it, because it's absolutely essential for me to speak Spanish. My constituents here in Oxnard, my clients in my legal practice are Spanish speakers, a lot of them. And I want to be Ventura County Supervisor. Just as I've been city council person here, I want to be able to communicate with the constituents. And if you can't, or you always have to use an interpreter, the interpreters are good. It's great to have it. Not everybody can have that language. It's just an advantage, I think. So in other parts of the world and even in the county, being bilingual, for example, Will Rogers School in Ventura, dual immersion, people are clamoring to get into that because they want their child to have both languages. So it just seems so not very wise to try to beat it out of people or shame them out of it or ignore that talent. Kids can learn a lot of languages. You know, they're like sponges, you know, maybe not every single child, but it's a natural ability that as you get to be older, and maybe in your late teens, early adulthood, it's harder to learn languages. So where am I going with that? I really think bilingualism is important. And let's just face it, people are here as immigrants because there's work. People are here because they've fled situations. Our city manager, I did a conversation with him yesterday. He's Vietnamese, born in Vietnam, and he came here as a refugee and had to learn English as a child. And this is our country. We used to really be proud of accepting immigrants from all over the world. That's who built this country. That right now, though the immigrants are small businesses, they're people doing very difficult work like our farm workers. They're taking care of our elders, our babies. They're doing some of the hardest work. And without them, that work would not get done. So we have to honor our immigrants and our immigrant history.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's really important. And I relate because I tried to learn Spanish for 4 years in my own school, and I really respect that. Learning from my teacher who was Argentinian and learning her culture and learning how much that influences the education system and how much that influences her culture was very, very beautiful. And speaking my own like home languages at home was very beautiful as well. So I know you're running for Ventura County Supervisor. So one of the key like priorities that you talked about in your website and just a little research is how you support those lower socioeconomic communities. How are those communities affected by the education system?
Well, I'll say for me, I know that education is the way out of poverty. And it also has to be affordable and accessible. And we have a public school system which is being less funded than we would like. The teachers right now, you know, there's the remote learning. A lot of people in our city don't have great computer equipment. And even if they do, they don't always have best internet service or affordable service. That means they may be missing out in education. So I think it's up to the government, cities, and the county to try to get a very robust internet for people everywhere, and for business as well, because you really can't have a thriving business community without internet. I'll give you an example. And I am talking about education, but I'm talking about a really necessary component right now for getting educated. I'm on the oversight committee for funding for small businesses and for tenant assistance. People haven't been able to pay their rent. Businesses have taken a hit because of the pandemic. And I was very concerned that our businesses in our Spanish-speaking community, whether it's Santa Paula or Oxnard or elsewhere, were going to have difficulty applying because you had to apply online. And it means you had to have a computer, not just an iPhone, and you had to be able to read English or Spanish. And many, many businesses needed a lot of help to do it, more help than other small businesses. So it's important to our community to have everybody be computer literate, to be literate in their own home language. English, of course, is the main language. That is, if you don't speak English, you can really be taken advantage of. If you don't speak English, you're not going to get a good job. So education is basis for a good future life. And it's not just about getting income, but it's also being a more open to the world, all the literature, art, history, and also democracy. If you don't have that understanding of how things work, how to seek redress from the government, as it says in the Constitution or Declaration of Independence, you're not going to be able to be a full citizen. So education is the basis of our democracy. It is the basis of people being able to say, hey, I don't want that toxic, polluting industry in my neighborhood. But if you don't know how to access the government, you don't know how to write a letter, you're afraid to contact your representatives or your council member, you can be victimized. So education is just, I mean, it's a basic for all of us to move forward, to progress, to understand what's happening, to assert our rights, to protect our families and ourselves, and to get a good job that you want. Maybe you don't want to be a real estate magnate. Maybe you want to be a teacher. Maybe you want to be a nurse. Maybe you want to be in construction trades. We're all going to have to be educated. And even if you're not going to be in a classroom teaching or using those particular skills, you need those skills to be an engaged resident. And a lot of times I don't like to say citizen because except in the generic sense, because we have so many people here who are residents. They haven't immigrated yet. They want to immigrate. They want to be citizens. They want to vote, but the door has been closed on them. So you may hear me not always saying citizens. I say constituents, residents. You know, children can't vote, but they are part of our community and they have rights. Even if they're not 18. So, you know, just a little nuance of how because I think people are sensitive to that too. When people say voters are important. They're important to me. My voters are important to me, and I'm sure to any other candidate. But when people say your vote counts, yes, it does. But what if you don't have a vote? What if you only have a voice? You pay everybody pays taxes, and you should have something to say, even if it's just sending a letter or making a phone call. So education is very important to our future and to progress and to not being duped by whoever wants to, you know, take advantage of us.
Yeah, and that's something really important. With Justice in the Classroom, we're totally student-led, and I think something that we really liked about your campaign is that you do realize that children and students do have rights, and it's important to listen to students when there are problems within the education system itself. So I know you talked about this briefly, but you were talking about disciplinary practices and how you represented different students as a lawyer and how you represented different cases. Do you want to speak more specifically about that experience?
Well, let me just back up a little bit and say, I just remember that I met a woman named, I think her name was Mary Tinker. Do you know Tinker versus Ohio?
I don't,
Sit
but
down, write down. This is actually, these students were thrown out of school because they wore black armbands and protested the war in Vietnam. And I belong to an organization called Center for Civic Education. They had a conference once, and the woman who, as a student, a young girl, protested and then took her case when she was punished for it in her high school, took her case to I think the Supreme Court is called Tinker versus Ohio. I'll find it later and send it to you. So expulsions, suspensions, the statistics show that in general, the children that are punished, and even preschoolers, are children of color, mostly boys. What that is, school to prison pipeline. You get kicked out of school or you're tagged as this kid is trouble instead of this child has some needs. They're on the way to mass incarceration. They're on their way to negative lifestyle. There's something called self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you know what that is? Well, they think I'm a juvenile delinquent, so I'll fulfill their expectations of me. I think that what you said earlier in one of the platform pieces is students need to see people of color teaching them, a variety of people of all kinds, of all genders, races, accents, looks, so that they know that not just this particular kind of person can be a teacher or a banker or a lawyer, but you can too. You know, you might be a chubby person, okay, let's say, or you might be a disabled person, you need a cane, or you stutter or something. Everybody has value, everybody has skills and gifts, and one size doesn't fit all. So if we have that kind of diversity in our schools, showing young influential minds that it's what we say in Spanish, si se puede. You can do it. You know, this is not closed off to you. You're a woman, you can be president. You can be a lawyer. When I went to law school, there were very few women lawyers. And I thought, it's impossible. How could I? But suddenly things changed. And then when I actually finished law school, the majority of the women in law school, the majority of the students in law school were women. But a lot of times the women are relegated to things like family law. They're not doing the litigation, just like women, we have more women teachers. It's because it's not well paid. So, hey, this is a job I can get. Women especially need to get equal pay. So that's another thing that's important. And when I get to the county, I'll make sure that it does. The other thing, just a little bit aside, you're too young for this, but families need childcare to improve productivity so that they don't have the mom, generally still mom taking care of the kids, but both parents, even in a same-sex family, need to be able to do paternity leave, family leave. They need to be able to take care of their kids, because you can't really, I know this is a problem at the county. I'm told by county workers, it's not an even situation where in this department you can go and take off if your child is sick, or you can't come in because your child is sick. We need to think about things like Patagonia is doing on-site daycare. That's kind of in the distance now. It takes some resources maybe we don't have right now, but it's something that actually improves productivity. You don't have to worry what's happening with your child. If you have to breastfeed your child, you can do it during the day at a convenient time for your employer and for you. We need to be more family friendly. And I think I veered off point, but diversity, knowing that not one size fits all, family friendly, child friendly places, so that, you know, so we can be a more humane society. Some places we're not humane. It used to be in law, the big law firms, it was kind of a macho thing to not go home, to go really late and neglect your family, and people suffer the consequences. So we only have a few minutes left, so geez.
Yeah, and are there like I know Justice in the Classroom is very education-based and educational equity-based. What has your campaign contributed to within educational justice and reform?
Well, it hasn't been a specific topic at the council, during my tenure here, but I am looking at providing broad-based digital access, internet access at either no cost, low cost for students. We need to improve it and throughout the county because there's some places that just don't have good access, and that will improve educational outcomes and business outcomes actually, and can attract businesses of the better quality if you have a good internet system. I think that we do have a workforce development program that is headed up by a county department head. I want to learn more about it, but it seems it really focuses on giving formerly incarcerated people a second chance. That's critical now because, first of all, you're still alive. You shouldn't be just thrown away because you've made some mistakes. And if you've paid your debt to society, whatever that was, you should be able to go out and contribute and get a good job and get training if you need it and have a home. And if you want to raise your family instead of being an outcast, that just causes trouble for all of us. So, and that is probably the formerly incarcerated generally are people who've not gotten a good education in their high school or even junior high. I know a judge locally who says you can tell when a child is kind of checked out of his or her future because they just kind of tune out to the possibilities. They've already been labeled as a problem, and we can't let that keep happening to people. There's some people do have difficulties. They need help. They need mental health help. They need services. But there's some people who they don't have a good family situation, or parents are working too much, and because they have minimum wage jobs and they have to do that to pay the rent. So I see it as a health issue too, a mental health issue. My basic platform is I will make every decision that comes to the board of supervisors, just as I have at council. Is this good for the health of our people? Is this going to hurt anybody? Is this going to hurt our environment? And I think that is just a really good way to make decisions, because if something's going to hurt people over in the south part of the city, and they're going to have to bear the burden of pollution, ultimately we're all going to have to pay for it, because there will be the loss of productivity, there'll be higher costs, there'll be children who don't get educated because they have, thinking about Flint, Michigan, and what happened to those folks, the kids who were drinking lead water, will have intellectual delay. We're all going to pay for that, and we better pay for it. And the polluters definitely should pay for it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of concludes our interview. I just want to say thank you so much for having us and having you here. It's just such an inspiration to have someone who's so pivotal within just activism and really trying to reform our system from every aspect. So thank you so much.
And we have to not give up hope, even though things look glum, because that's what some people want us to. Don't give up hope. Keep working. Don't be paralyzed. Don't despair. Organize. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording.